In the year 1871, the small rural towns of America were still recovering from the scars of the Civil War. Families tried to build lives from the ashes, and silence was often the unspoken rule of society. People kept their griefs behind closed doors. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and secrets were carefully locked away. It was in this fragile world of fear and restraint that the story of a forgotten child began, a tale so unsettling that no adult dared to put it into words, yet it was a child who would eventually break the silence. This child was not born into privilege nor into comfort. Instead, the family lived on the margins of society. The father, a stern man known for his quick temper; the mother, a quiet figure who carried herself with the heavy weight of sorrow. Their home stood on the edge of a small village surrounded by fields that were said to hold their own forgotten histories, abandoned cabins, broken wells, and burial mounds whispered about but never truly spoken of. The child, whose name history nearly erased, was described as pale with eyes that seemed far older than her years. Neighbors noted how she often sat alone in the fields, humming songs no one recognized, tunes that seemed to carry an ancient rhythm unlike anything the townsfolk had ever heard. Children her age avoided her not because of cruelty but out of unease. They claimed she sometimes spoke words that did not belong to a child of her age, phrases that sounded too heavy, too deliberate, as though they belonged to someone who had lived many lifetimes before. By the time she was 6 years old, stories began to circulate quietly at first, but soon with urgency. The child would enter a room and pause as though she felt something unseen, and then she would speak truths that no one else could have known. She spoke of deaths that had not yet been announced, accidents that had not yet occurred. She whispered of names that had long been buried and forgotten. At first her parents dismissed it, perhaps as childish imagination or strange coincidences, but as her words began to prove true, fear took root in their home. The mother avoided the child's gaze. The father grew harsher, insisting that silence be maintained within their walls. Neighbors too began to distance themselves. One recalled how the little girl once stared at his hand and calmly said, "You will never hold a plow again," and weeks later an accident crushed his wrist, rendering him unable to farm. The town priest visited once. After hearing troubling whispers, he found the child sitting quietly by the window, her eyes fixed on something invisible outside. She told him that she had seen what no one else would dare speak of. She mentioned that a man in the town had committed a terrible sin and had buried the truth where no one could find it. The priest, shaken to his core, asked her how she knew. She simply replied, "Because they told me." When he pressed further, she only smiled. Word spread rapidly, though in whispers of taverns, of Sunday gatherings, of anxious firesides. The child knew secrets adults worked tirelessly to bury. She spoke of betrayals, of hidden crimes, of shameful acts, and of things that no one dared to face in daylight. It was as though she carried the confessions of the entire town on her small shoulders, and she spoke them without hesitation. The most chilling accounts came when she began to describe events before they occurred. She told a mother that her son would not return from the forest, and 3 days later the boy was found drowned in the river. She warned an elderly woman about fire, and within a week the chimney of her house collapsed, setting part of the roof ablaze. People began to view her less as a child and more as a vessel of something unexplainable, something that belonged to no earthly understanding. But what disturbed people most was not the accuracy of her visions, it was the way she delivered them, with the calm tone of someone who had always known the truth. There was no tremor in her voice, no fear in her eyes. She would sit, speak, and then return to her quiet humming as though she were untouched by the horror her words carried. It was not long before her parents tried to silence her for good. They forbid her from speaking in public. They kept her confined to their home, and they punished her for every prediction, for every whispered secret. But confinement could not stop the whispers from slipping through the cracks. Visitors claimed they heard her voice when no one was near. Some said they heard her singing in the night, a song in a language they did not understand. One neighbor swore that when he peeked through the window he saw her speaking to someone, though no one else was in the room. The tension reached its breaking point when she revealed a secret so dangerous that it nearly destroyed her family. She spoke of her father, of a thing he had done many years before, something he thought was buried forever. The exact details were never written down in the public record, but whispers spoke of betrayal, of violence, of a shame too deep to endure. The family was thrown into chaos, and the child was no longer simply forgotten. She was deliberately erased, hidden from memory, as if by silencing her the town could silence the truths she carried. Yet history has a strange way of preserving what is meant to be remembered. Though her name was nearly lost, traces of her story survived in scattered accounts and whispered testimonies in journals left behind by neighbors who dared not speak openly. And it is through these fragments that we piece together the beginning of her haunting story, the tale of the forgotten child who revealed what no adult dared to say. As the years slowly passed, the presence of the child became heavier in the village rather than fading into silence. Her words spread like unseen roots, twisting through every household. Though no adult admitted it openly, they listened, they remembered, and they feared her. No matter how tightly the family tried to contain her voice, it slipped through cracks in the walls and reached ears that were desperate to ignore what they already knew. Children at school began to tell their parents strange tales she would whisper to them during lessons, and what she whispered always came true. A boy said she told him his dog would not greet him when he returned home that evening, and when he arrived the animal lay motionless, having passed away in the barn. Another child claimed she warned him not to climb the orchard tree, and the very next day a branch snapped under his foot, nearly breaking his leg. The teacher, disturbed by the growing stories, asked the girl directly, "How do you know these things?" She only smiled and replied, "Because the world tells me." The teacher wrote a letter to the local priest describing his concern. He warned that if the child was not guided carefully, the entire town might fall into hysteria. The priest, reluctant yet compelled, decided to confront her again, but this time what he witnessed unsettled him so deeply that he never spoke of it openly. He visited the family late one evening, and as he entered he claimed he heard two voices whispering. Though only the child was present when asked whom she was speaking to, she answered with a calmness that chilled him, "I speak to those who will not leave because no one listens." Rumors began to spread of shadows moving in the family home. Neighbors claimed to see flickers of light in the windows late at night. Others said they heard the sound of many voices, though the family insisted no one else was inside. But the most disturbing claim came from a midwife who once stayed overnight during an illness. She said she woke in the night to find the child standing in the center of the room, speaking clearly as though addressing a crowd, though no one else was visible. The midwife swore she felt dozens of unseen eyes upon her. Adults in the town began to avoid crossing paths with the girl. They would lower their eyes if they saw her walking in the lane, and they whispered warnings to their own children: "Do not speak to her, do not listen, do not bring her words into this house." But children are curious and children are fearless. They listened more than anyone, and they carried her secrets home whether they meant to or not. One account tells of a farmer who woke in the middle of the night to find his young son crying. When he asked what troubled him, the boy replied, "She told me about the body in the river." The farmer, furious, accused the child of filling his son with lies. Yet the next morning a body was discovered in the river exactly where the boy described it. The drowned man was a stranger, but the accuracy of the vision spread panic. The more the child revealed, the more unbearable life became for her parents. The mother broke down, often weeping behind closed doors. The father became cruel, striking the child into silence, forbidding her to speak at all in his presence. Yet nothing silenced her words. They came like an unstoppable tide, not always loud, not always direct. Sometimes she would carve them quietly into scraps of wood. Sometimes she would murmur them under her breath. Sometimes she would simply write them on the walls of her room when no one was watching. One neighbor later revealed that she once saw the girl standing in the field, her small hands pressed against the ground as though listening through the soil. When asked what she was doing, the child replied, "The earth remembers everything, and it told me what you buried." The neighbor left in terror and never spoke to her again. The secrets grew darker with time. What began as accidents and warnings soon turned into revelations about sins committed in secrecy. She accused a respected merchant of stealing from widows. She revealed that a teacher had struck a child so hard it left scars. She said a family had hidden an illegitimate birth by burying the infant where no one could find it. Each revelation was like a blade cutting into the fabric of the town, tearing away the carefully constructed image of respectability. The adults responded not with gratitude but with rage. They could not bear to face what she revealed because each word forced them to confront what they had hidden from themselves, so they chose instead to condemn her. They whispered that she was cursed, that she carried the devil's voice, that her very presence was a danger to their souls, and yet they could not deny that everything she spoke was true. The more the town tried to silence her, the more powerful her presence became. Some said they dreamed of her voice calling them in the night. Some claimed to see her figure at the edge of their vision even when she was nowhere near. Others swore they heard their own secrets spoken aloud in her voice, though they were alone. The forgotten child had become a mirror to the town. She reflected everything no one dared to face, and as her words spread further, the boundaries of fear cracked like fragile glass. She had become something larger than a child, something that could no longer be contained by the four walls of her family's home. It was at this point that the scandal began to brew, not in whispers, not in isolated households, but in the very heart of the town. Her words would soon uncover something so devastating that no adult dared to speak of it, a secret so dangerous it threatened to unravel the legacy of families who had built their lives on silence and denial. The child had already revealed what individuals wished to hide, but what came next would shake the town to its foundation and prove that some truths once spoken can never be erased. By the winter of 1871 the child's presence had become impossible to ignore. Her family no longer lived in quiet shame but in constant fear of what she might say next. Each word was a spark, and sparks were beginning to ignite fires in the hearts of neighbors who had much to lose. Her whispers had moved beyond accidents, beyond private sins. They had begun to touch the foundations of the town itself. One evening she entered the small chapel where the community gathered for prayer. She stood silently at the back, her eyes fixed on the priest, and though no one invited her to speak, her voice rose clear and unwavering. She said, "The walls of this place hide what you refuse to confess," and everyone froze. The priest trembled, for he knew what she meant. There were things even he could not bear to admit, things hidden within the very sanctuary that was supposed to be sacred. The next morning families woke to find words scrawled across the chapel doors. The handwriting was hers, yet she had never left her house. During the night the words spoke of meetings held in secrecy, of money exchanged for silence, of men who used the cloak of piety to disguise their betrayals. The scandal was undeniable, and for the first time the community fractured openly. Neighbors argued in the streets, husbands accused wives, wives accused husbands, and the child's voice was on every tongue. The local authorities were pressured to act, not because they believed her to be evil but because her words threatened to expose those in power. They could not allow a child to undo the legacy of men who had spent decades building wealth and respect. They branded her dangerous and unstable, insisting she be confined for her own safety, but everyone knew it was not her safety they feared, it was the safety of their reputations. Inside her home life grew unbearable. Her father now drank heavily, his anger boiling over with every passing day. Her mother pleaded with her to stay silent, but the girl only shook her head and whispered, "I do not choose what to say. The truth chooses me." At night she would wake screaming, not from nightmares but from the weight of voices that pressed against her skull. She said they demanded to be heard, that if she did not speak them they would tear her apart. A witness later claimed that one night the family's neighbor heard chanting from within the house, a low chorus of voices, though when he peered through the window he saw only the child sitting alone with her head bowed. The sound was so overwhelming he fled into the woods and never returned to that part of the road again. The scandal grew darker when she revealed something that even her own parents could not deny. She told the town of land deeds altered decades earlier, deeds that had transferred ownership from one family to another through lies and threats. The land now formed the heart of the town's wealth, and the families who held it were its leaders. If her words were proven true, their entire fortune would collapse like a house of cards. Suddenly the forgotten child was no longer a curiosity. She was a weapon that could destroy dynasties. She was watched day and night. Men stood outside her home waiting to hear her next words. Women whispered prayers begging for protection. Children dared one another to ask her questions, and the town began to divide into two camps, those who wanted to silence her forever and those who believed she was chosen by something beyond human comprehension. There were attempts to prove her false. Men brought her objects she could not possibly know and demanded she explain their origins. She touched a ring once and said it was stolen from a dead soldier on a battlefield. Her words matched a confession hidden in a letter kept by the very man who challenged her. They brought her a book locked in a chest, and she described in detail the faded letters inside. When the chest was opened, the truth matched perfectly with her account. Her power no longer seemed like a child's game. It was an unstoppable tide, and tides cannot be turned back, only endured. But endurance is a fragile thing when faced with fear, and so the families who stood to lose everything began to plan ways to erase her from memory. They whispered of sending her away, of placing her in an asylum, of locking her where her words could not travel. But the child herself seemed unafraid. She walked through the streets with calm eyes, though no one dared to meet her gaze. She told one farmer, "You bury truth like seed, but seed always grows." She told a widow, "Your house is filled with shadows that are not yours." She told the priest again, "You carry a book with missing pages, and you know who tore them away." By spring the scandal had reached a boiling point. The community no longer asked whether her words were true, they asked only how to contain the damage already done. Reputations were shattered, families torn apart, businesses ruined, and still she spoke, still she revealed, still she carried the weight of voices no one else would bear. And yet the greatest revelation was still to come, the one that would not only destroy individuals but threaten to erase the legacy of the very families who had built the town. The child was no longer uncovering secrets of the present. She was beginning to unearth the sins of the past, sins buried so deeply that even the elders had sworn never to let them surface again. Her words would soon expose what no adult dared to say, a truth that would echo not just in whispers but in the history of the land itself, and once spoken it could never be taken back. The summer of 1871 settled over the town with heavy heat and an even heavier silence, the kind of silence that follows when people know something dreadful is approaching but cannot yet see its shape. The child no longer whispered in corners. Her voice had grown stronger, clearer, and though she spoke as if in trance, her words carried the weight of history itself. One afternoon she walked into the town square, her bare feet coated with dust, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The townspeople gathered, unwillingly compelled, as if some invisible thread pulled them closer. She stood upon the steps of the courthouse and spoke. She said, "The foundations of this place are not stone, they are bones. The land you walk on is marked with blood. You refuse to remember, but the earth remembers, and I will not let it stay silent." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one could mistake what she meant. For decades there have been rumors of disappearances, of men who entered disputes over property and never returned, of women whose voices were silenced when they dared to speak against powerful families, but no one dared bring such suspicions into daylight. And now a child stood unafraid, declaring them openly. Her words shook pillars of authority more deeply than any protest or uprising could. Within days she revealed more, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. She spoke of a wealthy merchant who had arranged the ruin of his own brother to seize land. She named a respected matron who hid an illegitimate child by sending the infant to die in the woods. She even told of a judge who once sold verdicts for gold and silver hidden beneath his floorboards. The crowd that once dismissed her as fanciful now hung on her every word, though with terror rather than belief. Some prayed for her to stop fearing divine punishment for uncovering sins too dark to speak. Others whispered that she was a prophet chosen to cleanse the community of rot. But there were also those whose lives she endangered with every utterance. These men gathered in shadowed rooms, their voices low, their plans darker than the sins she revealed. They could not allow a child to destroy the legacy they had spent lifetimes building. Her parents begged her to remain silent, but the child simply said, "I do not bring these words. They come to me whether I wish them or not. They are older than me, older than you, older than this town itself. They are the weight of memory, memory buried beneath years of lies, and I must speak them or be torn apart from within." Her father in despair struck her one night, but she did not cry. She only whispered, "Your hand will never feel warmth again." And from that night on he complained of a coldness that never left his bones. The town began to unravel at the seams. Families turned against each other. Trust dissolved like mist in the sun. Merchants refused trade, fearing curses. Neighbors boarded windows against the possibility of hearing truths meant to stay hidden. Even the church emptied as people muttered that no sermon could wash away what the girl had revealed. One evening she led a group of children into the fields outside the town where the grass grew high and the soil turned dark. She stopped at a patch of ground and pressed her small hand to the earth. "Here," she said, "here lies the reason none of you can sleep. The men who followed me into the night never returned because the earth took them back, and it will not give them peace until you speak their names." The children trembled, but when the ground was later dug by brave hands, bones were found twisted and broken, the remains of men no one had dared to admit missing. Panic spread like wildfire. The child's words were not imagination, they were evidence, evidence that tore at the roots of power, evidence that stained names once thought untouchable. She had crossed a threshold from rumor into undeniable fact, and once crossed there was no return. In desperation the leaders gathered, demanding her removal. Some said she must be sent to an asylum far away, others whispered of darker solutions, but the townspeople were divided. Many now saw her as a vessel of justice, a reminder that the past could not be silenced forever. Torches were lit, arguments erupted, and the streets filled with shouting until dawn. And through it all the child sat quietly on her doorstep, her doll resting in her lap, her eyes watching the horizon as if she knew something far larger than the town itself was nearing. She whispered to no one in particular. They thought they could bury their sins, but the earth does not forget, the air does not forget, the bones do not forget, and I will not forget. Her final revelation came on a night when storms rolled across the valley, thunder cracking like a drumbeat of war, lightning painting the sky in jagged scars. She walked into the chapel, the very place where months earlier she had first spoken against the priest, and she said aloud before the altar, "The oldest sin is not what was done but what was hidden, the silence of those who knew and said nothing. This silence is the curse that binds you, and it will bind your children unless the truth is faced." The storm raged outside, but her words cut deeper than thunder, for in that moment every person present felt the weight of complicity. The truth was not just about the sins of leaders, it was about the silence of followers, and the silence was heavier than any crime. When morning came the storm had passed, but the town was changed forever. Lines were drawn, families estranged, faith broken, trust scattered like ashes on the wind, and at the heart of it all was the forgotten child whose voice refused to be buried, whose revelations had shaken the very ground beneath their feet. The town never returned to what it had been before the summer of 1871. The child had spoken truths that could not be unsaid, and though the people tried to cover them again with silence, the echoes lingered like whispers in every street and shadow. In the weeks after her final revelation, families left their homes, entire households abandoning shops, farms, and properties as if distance could protect them from the weight of exposure. Those who remained walked with heads lowered, speaking little, avoiding eye contact, their laughter gone, replaced with an air of dread that clung like smoke after fire. The men who had plotted to silence her were never the same. Some fell into ruin, their businesses collapsing as customers vanished. Others took ill, complaining of a sickness that no doctor could name. Their bodies weakened as though the weight of their secrets drained life itself. There were even those who disappeared entirely, leaving only locked doors and unanswered questions. The town recorded these vanishings quietly, pretending not to notice, yet everyone knew. The shadow of the child stretched across each fate. Her parents lived in a kind of haunted quiet, her father unable to shake the cold curse she had spoken, her mother weeping often, though the girl herself remained strangely calm. She played with her doll, she walked the same streets, she sat by the river, as if she were both present and absent at once. Some said she had finished her purpose and was only waiting to be called away by whatever power had spoken through her. By autumn the church bell rang less often, sermons shortened, the priest himself fell silent when he looked upon her eyes and turned pale as though remembering the words she had once spoken against him. Faith, which had once united the town, now divided it. Some believed she was a prophet sent to strip away false holiness, others whispered she was a punishment, a living reminder of sins no prayer could erase. The fields too bore marks of change where she had pointed out hidden graves. The soil grew thick with weeds, farmers refused to plow those areas fearing curses, others avoided the roads where she had once walked, claiming they heard the sound of her voice even when she was nowhere near. Every corner of the town seemed touched by the memory of her words, as though she had branded the land itself. Then one evening without warning she was gone. Some said they saw her walking toward the woods, her doll clutched in her arms, her bare feet leaving no trace in the dirt. Others swore she was taken by strangers arriving at night in a wagon with no lamp. Still others believed she simply vanished into air, dissolving like smoke. Her family never explained, they locked their home and refused to answer questions, and so the child who had unsettled an entire town disappeared as suddenly as she had arrived. What remained were her words, carried from mouth to mouth across counties and generations. The story of the forgotten child spread, whispered by those who believed she uncovered buried crimes, and by those who feared speaking her name might invite her curse. People far away debated whether she had been touched by divinity or by madness, whether she revealed truth or created it, yet none could deny the way her presence had broken the silence of an entire community. Over time the town tried to bury its history once more. New buildings rose over old sites, new families moved, and children played in streets where their parents dared not linger, but the legend remained like a scar beneath the skin. It was said that on stormy nights one might still hear the faint sound of a child's voice carried on the wind, speaking names no one dared repeat. It was said that the earth itself shifted in places where bones had been left too long in silence, and that to dig too deep was to risk hearing whispers not meant for the living. And so her story became more than history, it became a warning that silence is not protection, that the past cannot be hidden forever, that even the smallest voice can pierce the walls built by fear and power. The forgotten child had vanished, but her truth remained etched into the land, into memory, into every uneasy dream that haunted those who once thought secrets could be sealed away. Now I ask you, the one listening to these words, could such a story be only legend, or is it possible that children sometimes see and speak what adults refuse to admit? Could silence truly be a curse heavier than the sins themselves? What would you have done if you lived in that town in 1871? Would you have listened? Would you have believed? Or would you have tried to bury her words like so many others? If this story left you questioning the shadows of history and the secrets buried beneath ordinary lives, then stay with us. More forgotten tales, more unsettling truths, and more mysteries that blur the line between fact and legend await ahead. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Share this story with someone who dares to listen, and join the search for truths too heavy to stay hidden forever.